In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, hello everyone and welcome to the new episode of the Fact series in which we discuss international political matters every week. This is Foad Mahdavi and in this episode I have the honor of being the host of Professor Anthony James Hall, Professor of Globalization Studies at the University of Lethbridge in Alberta, Canada. We are here to discuss the corona, media, and the US. Thank you for joining us, dear Professor James Hall, and good to be with you. For the first slide, I'd like to have your rich words about the general policy of Western media in releasing the news associated with the US. How much authentic are they?
Well, we're living in a time of tremendous disinformation in Western media, and it became very outrageous after 9/11. It seems this coronavirus episode, this crisis, this epidemic, is creating much new territory for disinformation. So it's very difficult to monitor where we actually are in the world and in our relations with the outside world, outside of North America, in this era. Nevertheless, there are a few little points of oasis where there is some free discussion. American Herald Tribune, I'm the editor-in-chief there, and I think there is a very good display of a wide variety of views from around the world expressed in English. UN's Review is kind of become a major site of some kind of free speech. The Anti-Defamation League, for some reason, is leaving this UN's Review place alone because Israel is discussed. Some of these forbidden subjects are discussed. So there is an ability to exchange with like-minded people, but the dominant media, the Washington Post, the CNN, which incidentally took a very harsh attack on American Herald Tribune, the BBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the CBS, the ABC, the NBC, the mainstream media, as we call it, is awash with disinformation. And of course, this whole coronavirus episode, I've done some considerable research. I'm not an expert in the field, but I devoted quite a bit of time to looking into it. And it drew me to look into the reality of the bioweapons laboratories. One is in Wuhan. There's one in Canada, in Winnipeg. These are all over the world where they do research in bioweapons, warfare through viruses, through spreading contagion. And this is a subject that comes up in relation to this coronavirus, this so-called COVID-18. And did it involve the Chinese in something that went wrong in their bioweapons research, some kind of experiment that went wrong, or maybe even some kind of agenda to attack the people in Hong Kong who are protesting against the Communist Party, the one-party system in China that has dominated since the revolution, the Maoist revolution of 1949. But another approach is that the U.S. bioweapons industry, the part of the military-industrial complex devoted to bioweapons, that this has been a factor in this outbreak of this very contagious virus, coronavirus, that spreads very quickly. So we're seeing now a kind of panic in the United States itself as this epidemic starts to affect major centers of power in the United States, but especially New York City. And it seems that the White House administration of Donald Trump is kind of in a crisis, is not sure which way to go on this matter. So I could get into what appears to be increasingly the evidence is coming out that it has something to do with what happened at the Wuhan Military Games, an Olympic-style event that took place in Wuhan, China, where, of course, this first outbreak, this first highly publicized outbreak of what they're now calling COVID-19, there was in Wuhan a military games from October 18 to October 27. And it would have given an opportunity for U.S. soldiers to spread the virus from Wuhan, because there is this big, they call it well, it's a laboratory, a level 4 pathogen laboratory in Wuhan. It would give the United States, if they did such a thing, some kind of plausible deniability. They could say, well, it came from the Wuhan laboratory. In any case, it is now appearing that 5 people got sick. U.S. Soldiers got sick of some unexplained virus while they were in Wuhan. And now it's coming out that they were staying in a particular hotel, and many people in the hotel, the Oriental Hotel, which is in the same area as the market, where the mainstream media says it all came from some kind of natural process of bat soup or something, some animal to human transmission that then spread from that point. But it happens that that particular military group were staying there. The news comes out that they had been before that in Fort Detrick, Maryland. Now, Fort Detrick, Maryland is the most famous laboratory for bioweapons in the United States. It's close to Washington. In the summer of 2019, there was an order from the disease control establishment, the CDC, to close down Fort Detrick. But it seems these this military group, which did very poorly in the actual sports events, the U.S. came in 35th. It's as if they were preoccupied with something else other than competing in the sports events. And this team had been training in the Fort Detrick area. And there was a disease going around in that area. They were describing it as respiratory problems in the summer of 2019. They were describing it as respiratory problems to do with vaping, smoking, like e-cigarettes or smoking material through the process of vaping. And so now they're looking at that and saying, was this the early stages of this virus? Did it escape from Fort Detrick? For some reason, Fort Detrick was closed down because they weren't having proper safeguards to protect the viruses from escaping, or was there some kind of purposeful plot here? And of course, this gets more significant because quite recently an official in China accused the United States and said, well, you know, yes, the virus emerged in China, but it doesn't mean it came from China. It could have been brought to China. And he specifically mentioned this military games period. This, of course, is becoming a major issue. The Trump administration called the disease, they called it the China virus. And this is offensive to people in China. Now, of course, it's no secret that among the leading allies of China these days is Iran. So if it was an attack, a bioweapons attack by the U.S. military on China, well, what happened with Iran? Iran got the virus, got an epidemic very early. And more than that, what is calls attention to Iran is the fact that the virus seems to have affected disproportionately the leadership high-ranking officials in the Iranian government. So if it's a bioweapon, the idea of attack, using the bioweapon to target specific groups or even specific individuals, this idea comes up. Now, in my own research, one of the outspoken voices pointing a finger of condemnation, not at the United States, but at China, and blaming the biological warfare program of China, his name is Danny Shoham, and he is a military officer for Israel, and he's an expert in bioweapons and chemical warfare. And so he was working in India. He did a study of the Chinese bioweapons program, and he was very outspoken and quoted a great deal by the enemies of China. Now, when I talk about the enemies of China, there is, of course, the United States to consider. But within China, there is the Falun Gong movement, a movement of meditation, Buddhism, Taoism. In any case, Falun Gong became so popular and so well organized in China that by 1999, the government declared it to be a heretical organization. So Falun Gong has an international media network. Epoch Times is one of their media outlets. And China has great controversy within itself. There are dissident movements within China. There have been Epoch Times, Washington Times, Radio Free Asia, basically CIA-backed organizations which have been pointing the finger of condemnation at China. And among them is this outspoken figure, Danny Shoham, who is representing the bioweapons capacity of Israel. And so that's kind of Israel. It's reminiscent of 9/11. Of course, after 9/11, certain neoconservatives were immediately pointing at Muslims, and especially at many Arab Muslims, and at Osama bin Laden and at Al-Qaeda. There was a very, even on the day of 9/11, a very quick rush to demonize Muslims and Muslim organizations, as we were told, and we were given this whole picture of a sort of independent movement of Muslim people who wanted to destroy Western freedoms. And, we look back on this as propaganda. But I see a kind of echo of this in the quickness of Danny Shoham, who is a former IDF official, pointing a finger of condemnation at China. Meanwhile, there's this other dimension of it. There could be some combination of agendas. We don't know what's happening. And of course, all of this discussion is more or less declared illegitimate and the realm of so-called conspiracy theories in the mainstream media. We're supposed to think that this was all an act of God, that this is somehow just natural forces. We're supposed to ignore the fact that this area of research, bioweapons, ironically, in these laboratories where this is being looked at, they work on vaccines, and they sometimes seem to be working on public health initiatives and how to save people and how to treat people and such. And that type of research does go on. But at the same time, one day you can be looking for vaccines, the people in these laboratories. The next day, you can be developing bioweapons, how to kill people, masses of people. And of course, one of the themes of this research is, can you identify genetic strains in particular populations so you can target people? So from my perspective, whether or not this particular coronavirus does emerge from the laboratories and is partially genetically modified. And there is evidence that it is. For instance, there is a genes or RNA, which is related to DNA integrated into this virus that is HIV, that is AIDS. And where did that come from? We live in an era where there is genetic science. There is a new type of intervention that can be made to change the genes of viruses and people and everything else, all life. So we're into a realm where I think we need some really frank discussion, and this discussion is happening to some extent, but it's very marginalized by the mainstream dominated discourse. And of course, in the United States, there's an election going on. It's an election year. So Trump's Republican Party, Democratic Party, is very quick to want to condemn whatever Trump's position might be. And Trump, it seems, is kind of confused. At one point, he was talking about the importance of taking care of the people, and to heck with the stock market, which is decimated. We've got to take care of people, and we've got to quarantine people and do lockdowns and this kind of thing. But just yesterday, he changed his tact and said, well, now the U.S. is going to go back to business, and we're not going to have these lockdowns and quarantines. And it's going to be over. And he seems to deviate between this is very serious and it's going to have a great impact, and there has to be drastic actions taken, including by the federal government.
Since the US healthcare system is not working as it should be, 70% of the Americans are deeply concerned about being infected by coronavirus. Do you think Trump's mismanagement has caused the US healthcare system crisis?
Yes, of course. Most of the West or the Occident, the countries of Europe, Canada, we have healthcare systems. We have a government-backed healthcare insurance in a sense, so healthcare, a degree of healthcare, is considered to be like a right of citizenship. But the United States doesn't have that. You could say that the United States has, invests so much of its money in arms and military that it doesn't have much left over for, say, public health care. So you have a very privatized system in the United States where people with money, with good jobs, they can have healthcare insurance. But the general run of the population does not share that. So this creates a crisis for the particular system in the United States. Like if you go to the hospital and you think you might have a coronavirus symptom and you want a test, well, is the test going to cost you money? And if you go into the hospital, are you going to be expected to pay? And if you have healthcare insurance, okay, but if you don't have healthcare insurance, do you just stay away? And so all of these issues are arising, and it's a very sort of powerful contrast because, of course, China is a authoritarian state to some extent. It has a one-party system, and it's a socialist system. It's a communist system, and ironically, China has become this factory of capitalism. But nevertheless, its government has this socialistic system. It's quite centrally organized and controlled. And so you look at how the Chinese government handled the outbreak of the Wuhan virus in China, and they were able to do very drastic actions and to coordinate actions. It looks like the Chinese government at first tried to cover it up, but once they made a commitment to try to reverse the whole affair, it seemed to be effective. Now, of course, North America deindustrialized. North America, starting in the era of Reagan, gave up on its industrial production. It moved its industrial production to different countries, but especially China. And it's one of the phenomenal developments of our time that China so quickly industrialized and took over the production of almost everything in the West, almost all the manufactured goods, including the production of drugs, of pharmaceutical medicines. All of this comes from China. And so these supply chains, this supply from China, this is being disrupted in North America. And it's just starting to kick in now that the replacement parts and all kinds of things will not be available from China. And of course, so much of the money passes through China because all of this industrialization requires financial flows. And of course, there are some very wealthy people in China. Iran is very integrated into the way China has been operating as of late. The trauma to the whole system of China being pulled out of production of industrial goods, of China being pulled out of this money flow. The stock market has crashed in a way that we haven't seen since the Great Depression, maybe more than the Great Depression. So this adds another layer of complexity to what's going on these days.
There are negative propaganda against Iran on behalf of the Western media, which is getting worse these days due to the corona outbreak. Could you please tell us about this evil approach?
Of course, the whole approach to the treatment of Iran, it doesn't just start with this crisis. The dehumanization of people in Iran, the fact that they're not really depicted, the Iranian people are not really depicted, as full-fledged people with a variety of views and opinions, and in all their diversity and cultural richness, if you like, so this demonized approach, I think, just takes on a new dimension. Oh, they don't have this, they don't have that, they don't have. I don't think there's an understanding of the sophistication of the Iranian, the healthcare system, the university system. Iran, and I've been there several times, is a very sophisticated, complex society that isn't being depicted. And of course, there's these ideas that Iran is misrepresenting, that the virus is much worse. And generally speaking, there is this kind of it's really upsetting to see this kind of dehumanization and cruelty in especially the Israel lobby seems to almost be taking satisfaction in how harshly the epidemic has affected Iran. The other interesting element is that I'm coming to understand that Italy was very far on the Belt and Road program, was very much absorbing the idea of shifting from an orientation towards transatlanticism, towards the United States as the core entity, and moving more towards a Eurasian, looking east instead of west. And that the relations between Italy and China were quite developed. I was surprised even to see Chinese police patrolling Italy, and I guess many tourists from China were going to Italy. So it seems that is there a particular way that Italy is being punished for siding with or being pulled towards the East rather than continuing its traditional relation with the West since World War II, since Italy was on the losing side of World War II, but then Germany and Italy and Japan were very much absorbed into the U.S.-centered empire, if you like. The way the pattern of this epidemic seems to suggest a kind of geopolitical underpinning. The fact that, is it in fact biological warfare that is happening? Is there retaliation happening? Is there, one strain of the coronavirus? Is this all just happening, on a natural level with, random mutations and such? Or is there some kind of engineering taking place? Well, we don't know for sure, but certainly we need to focus on the reality that these biological warfare systems, programs, research facilities, professionals, expertise, this all exists. And it's time to stop that. And so this is a time for humanity to look across our borders and saying, it seems that a group got us into this situation. Who got us into this situation? Are they going to be the ones who take over supposedly fixing this situation? And I would say no. This has proven a failure of the system on a major scale. And this is a time of crisis, but it's also a time of some opportunity to mobilize and change the way we do things on the planet, and get away from this obsession with war and destroying one another as a way to have our international relations. This is a nightmare scenario that humanity has to find a way to throw off the weight of this oppression, of this warmongering mentality that is, destroying our civilization and destroying the possibility of our future generations of having any kind of decent future.
As we are about to have the US presidential election, could you tell us how much the corona outbreak has affected this election? As far as I understood, Louisiana was the first state in the US to suspend elections in the Democratic Party because of the corona outbreak.
Well, will there even be an election? And how do you do politics when people can't assemble? And I think that's one of the things that perhaps Trump is causing Trump to say, we're not going to go along with this lockup and quarantine and everything. So will there be an election in 2020? And the core issue would and should be, our healthcare system, this epidemic. This would be, the necessary core issue. And what about an election where Joe Biden is going to compete with Donald Trump? What indication of a failure of the Democratic Party to renew itself, to bring in new ideas. Joe Biden, there's a tape going around. He is a pathological liar and a plagiarist, and all of this can be shown. So there is a justifiable constituency of people in the United States who want a significant alternative to Donald Trump. But that alternative is, we're just seeing this old oligarchy within the Democratic Party, represented by, Clintons, Obamas, Hillary Clinton, now Joe Biden, who was Obama's vice president. We're not getting out of this very inward, sort of nepotistic core of the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party have shown themselves to be every much an instrument of the war machine and invasions and militarization as the Republican Party. This two-party system where these two parties seem to represent the same elite. The U.S. system of democracy is in trouble. The U.S. itself is in major trouble. And so what is going to be the outcome in the election? Will there be an election this year, 2020, in November? All of these are up for grabs. It's all uncertain. It's all unclear where things are headed right now.
Many analysts see Trump's rise to power in the United States as weakening, ridiculing, and deteriorating of U.S. foreign policy. and it leads to the decline of American power. What do you think?
Well, there's certainly a decline of American power when it comes to economics. The debt level becomes huge in the United States, and so much of the debt is owned by China, which is a very confusing situation. But the reality is that the U.S. has a lot of its power invested in militarism, in the armed forces, in weapons research. And so it makes for a very dangerous moment for the world as the United States whole system declines in its overall functionality, utility to serve its own citizens, to make a better life for its own citizens. At the same time, it has this military capacity at its fingertips, which, as we can see in the case of what's going on with this epidemic, it's quite possible that the U.S. used its capacity in that regard, right to create a situation which then got out of control and is affecting the United States now itself and putting the United States in peril. So these are huge times for all of us. But I would say the heart and soul of the matter is going to be the future of the United States and the future of China too. Like these two superpowers have been rocked to the core. Some say that China is emerging from this much better than the United States, which is just now going into the crisis. So that's where I'll leave it.
Thank you for joining us again, dear Dr. James Hall. I do really appreciate of you. And I'm so thankful for your noteworthy remarks, and I hope things are going well with you and your work far away from negative things. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye now.
Dear audience, it was another talk with Dr. Anthony James Hall, Professor of Globalization Studies at the University of Lethbridge in Canada. Thanks for watching and catch you later.